Alrighty, good evening and welcome to the February 23rd CBO Planning Commission planning session with CBO Plans Together. I think Jennifer is going to moderate the meeting, most of the meeting, and with the help of a couple of other people. But I think there are a couple of introductions that Jenny would like to do.
Sure. I guess I can introduce who's on the call tonight from CBO Plans Together, and by way of that, introduce some new faces. So tonight we have representatives from RHI, Roadside Harwell, and Brick and Story on the phone. I think Lee from Code Studio may join us in a bit. HRNA will not be on the call tonight because we're talking about the future land use plan, the comprehensive plan piece of that. So, but from RHI tonight, we have myself, Dina Roadside, and both of us you've met. And then we also have, I'm glad to say, Ron Sessoms and Max Pastore, who are both urban designers and urban planners with RHI. And they will be leading us through much of the discussion tonight. So I'm glad they're here to talk with you all, and they're, they can tell you more about the methodology we use and some of our thinking. So did I miss anyone from the team who's on? I don't think so. Okay, great. With that, should I go ahead and get started? Great, thank you. So if you'd like to pull up the slides, Joe, that would be great. Thank you. You can go to the next slide. So our goal for today is to really have a robust discussion of this future land use framework that we've sent along in this presentation. Starting with some initial discussion about the history of development in the city, existing conditions, previous planning processes, and other aspects that really fed into our development of this future land use framework. This is, as you all know, our first discussion of this initial framework. And the framework we're going to present to you is a draft concept. It's meant to be, as we keep saying, a framework. It's not a full plan. So it'll be fleshed out and further defined next time you see it. That'll be defined based on our conversations today, as whether other input we may get from staff, as well as the steering committee in the meantime. I'll note before we move on, this is a work session, so we do want to hear from you and have this be a really interactive session. We've already gotten several comments, so thank you for that. And we'll be happy to discuss those further as we go along. That being said, noting that we have quite a bit to get through and we only have 2 hours and we don't want to go too far over that. I want to be able to leave some time for community comments in the end, and of course a lot of robust discussion for us all when we get to that future land use framework. So I will be playing the timekeeper and trying to keep us going on that, while obviously allowing for discussion throughout. Next slide, please. Oh, sorry, you can go one more. So this is our updated schedule reflecting what we hope will be our next steps. That includes having not only discussion tonight and likely another discussion with you, but having a community discussion about the future land use map as we get into April. That community input point will really be focused on the land use map, whatever that looks like at that point, but it will also be a chance for folks to review other revisions to the plan, not only to the land use piece, but to the other topic-specific chapters. So as we work toward that, we're meeting with you tonight. We have a meeting with the steering committee on March 8th. And so I think we haven't talked about timing about this with NDS yet, but if possible, we'd like to have another check-in with you, obviously, before we progress to the full public engagement. But that is our intent, is to have a really thorough process here to talk about this land use map as we move forward. And this is on the website if you want to take a closer look. Next slide, please. So I want to just give some brief thinking points as we go into this discussion tonight. As this CBO Plans Together process is really 3 things that are all really related. It's the affordable housing plan piece, which we talked about a lot and which we're talking with council about on March 1st, hoping that we will have an endorsement of that concept. That affordable housing plan piece will then be pulled into the comprehensive plan piece. And then once the comprehensive plan is fully adopted, we'll be rewriting the zoning ordinance. But the comprehensive plan future land use map might often look to some like a zoning map, but it's not, as I think you all are well aware. But the future land use map is really meant to be a tool to describe the plan's long-term vision for the location and character of development in the city. And so, we say here it's 20 to 30 years, but that it really depends on the jurisdiction, what folks decide to say is sort of the vision here. So that might be something that we talk about tonight. It's also a guide for development. It's not a requirement unless the city chooses to treat it as such. It can be used when evaluating development proposals, but it's not legally mandatory. So the comprehensive plan, we said what it is, but it's not, as I said, a rewrite of the zoning ordinance, but that will be a next step in this process. We know that the zoning ordinance is really how these things get implemented, and it's really of great interest to a lot of people, but we want to make sure we have the more holistic concept in this comprehensive plan piece before we talk too much about the specifics of zoning. Before I move on from here, I will ask, does anyone else from the consultant team want to add anything more to this or any of this initial discussion before we jump in?
Yeah.
Okay, great. Well, with that, I will propose that we move forward. Ron will give some historic context and talk about some existing conditions. And then if there are questions as we go, feel free to mention, but we will stop at a couple of points and open up for discussion. That being said, Ron, if you want to go ahead, that'd be great.
Yep, next, please. So as you look to the future of Charlottesville, it's important to take a look at the past and how the city has evolved over time. Next. Charlottesville, as we all know, has had a very storied past. Charlottesville was founded in 1762 and incorporated shortly after the Civil War. Two major elements that led to the development of the city in its early days was the establishment of UVA and the extension of the Virginia Central Railroad to the city. Next, please. From that incorporation post-Civil War, just like many other cities throughout the United States, there was a series of ordinances enacted that really began to create restrictive covenants within the city that segregated races within the city. This is something that was not uncommon amongst many American cities, and it's important to note that none of these ordinances are active today. However, they do begin to tell the story about the demographic distribution throughout the city as it exists today. In the early 1920s, the city enacted its first zoning code, which allowed for up to 2 units per acre instead of 1, or 2 units per property. Next, please. In the 1950s, the city saw the development of several plans, one being the city's first comprehensive plan in 1958, which led to the city's first urban renewal project, which proposed the extension of the downtown mall and the elimination of Vinegar Hill. The elimination of Vinegar Hill is quite significant. It was an African-American community. With that community being raised in 1964, there are residents that are still alive that remember the urban renewal project that took away their neighborhood. So it's important to recognize the history. Sometimes it's good and sometimes it's bad, as in the case of Vinegar Hill, to understand what were some of the major planning projects that has led to the development of the city over time. Next. By 1991, a new zoning map for the city is introduced, which broadened single-family zoning within the city. By 2008, the current zoning code was adopted, and by 2013, the current comprehensive plan was adopted. And as you know, this planning process will lead to the update of that 2013 comprehensive plan. Next, please. So is there any questions or feedback on the history portion of the presentation? If not, we can just keep rolling into existing conditions of the community.
And I will note, just before we move on, we know it's not an exhaustive list of every zoning amendment. There are a lot of some key other dates that are in there, but we want to sort of give some major highlights there.
Yeah, some major milestones, exactly. City of Charlottesville is a compact urban city encompassing over 10 square miles, but 50,000 residents. And it's important to know that Charlottesville does not lay without within isolation. The city lies within the county, and the urban ring is a joint master planned area around the city of Charlottesville, which you can see on the map to the right with those proposed land uses that was developed as part of the One Community Project, which served to unify the borders of the city with the county. The plan is calling for many different types of land uses, residential, UVA expansion area, office, mixed use areas, the US 29 corridor, the Pantops area, and the south and western edges of the city are proposed to become more intensively developed over time. Next, please. The city is one that is rich with amenities. Charlottesville is the county seat for the county. It's also a primary destination for shopping and other community amenities that bring people to the city. This map begins to show the distribution of community amenities. Downtown is the city's core and serves as the city hub. It's home to retail, places for people to live. Again, the city is the county seat for the county, a seat for the county. So there are many civic institutions located downtown. And then balancing that is the US 29 corridor to the north, which serves as a major shopping destination for the city and the surrounding county. The Pantops area to the east is an emerging amenity cluster. The new Martha Jefferson Hospital is located in the Pantops area, and it's creating a new employment and destination node on the city's eastern edge. Next. Next. Charlottesville is a place of employment. You can see from the census data here that employment is concentrated around downtown. Again, you can see that some of those civic uses are large providers of employment for the city. UVA, of course, to the west, and then along the US 29 corridor to the north. The smaller context map to the left of the main image, you can see what happens around the city. So if you look to the city, you want to understand where there are employment centers that are located within proximity to the city. So to the north, again, that US 29 corridor employment hub continues to the north. And then you can see on that map around the Martha Jefferson Hospital, there's another major employment hub on the east side of the city. Next. Charlottesville is a place where people live. This map here shows the planning districts identified by the city. These are not neighborhoods. These are the city's planning districts that provides opportunity for coordinated planning efforts throughout the city. And it's important to understand that where we do have neighborhoods, that they're all different. They vary in size, community context, history, and certainly demographics throughout the city. Next. And again, the city is a place to live, and it is served by diverse neighborhoods. In this map, which is still under development, you may see some residential properties which were omitted on this map, and we're working to make those corrections moving forward. But here we wanted to just show the diversity of housing types within Charlottesville. You can see there's no complete area that's one singular land use. Low density single family land use is a dominant residential type. However, there are medium density land uses and higher density land uses as well, which make up those neighborhoods. Next. Here you can begin to see what I mean about single family spectrum of lower density residential development to the spectrum on the other end of the spectrum, which would be the higher density residential, which would include apartment buildings and other more substantive development types. And then in the middle, we have townhomes, duplexes, triplexes, and quadruplexes, which are, a medium density land use type that provides affordable housing types to community residents. Next. Charlottesville is a place of transportation. On this map, we have identified corridors based on average daily traffic. We know that we are a city that not only depends upon cars to get around, but we're also a transit-oriented city. Many of these major corridors have transit facilities, and as we begin to look to future land uses, we want to look at where people and how people move throughout the city. You can see the darker the shade of blue, the more intensive the traffic or intensive the corridor is, down to the lighter shades, which are less intensive. So you can begin to see how the downtown is a major hub, and then you have major corridors leading from the hub out to places like US 29, 5th Street, High Street, and McIntyre Road, and the 250 bypass. Next. And the city is a place of open space and nature. So here you can begin to see the distributions of parks and open spaces, which, because of the city's compact size, parks and open spaces are relatively walkable within the city. We have larger neighborhood parks, primarily located throughout the city center area and to the south. And then the city's larger, more citywide parks are located to the north. The Rivanna River is a major natural resource on the city's eastern edge, and there are a number of tributaries that extend from the river, which provide natural corridors that connect parks and open spaces throughout the city. An important natural resource of the city is its topography. As many of you know, the topography within the city of Charlottesville vary. It has a very rolling type landscape, and that has influenced how the city has developed over time. Next. The city is fairly developed. Again, 10 square miles, most of the city is developed, leaving only 3% approximately of the existing acreage of the city undeveloped. So as we begin to look at the future land use, we have to take in consideration that there's not a lot of opportunities for greenfield development in the city. So if we can't grow out, we have to grow up. Next. And there are a number of projects in the pipeline within the city, including residential, commercial, retail, and office. As you can see here, about 1,600 residential units are either approved, under review, or under construction within the city, which is a big deal, especially considering that the city has such a shortage of housing, and housing demand is so high in the city. And also supportive land uses, including commercial development to support those new residents and existing residents, as well as places for employment. We're seeing an increase in office development as well. Next. So that concludes our overview of existing conditions. We can pause there if there's any questions. Otherwise, I can just keep going and we can leave more time for conversation at the end.
Well, one thing I wanted to note, just when we were on the vacant sites slide, was one thing, and this just occurred to me as we were going through, there's vacant sites, and then, there's also the consideration of underutilized sites, which obviously can mean many different things. But these sites that we're showing on here are including parcels that are completely non-developed, not necessarily underutilized sites. Is that correct, Ron?
Yeah, that's right. So
Okay.
your underutilized sites will be some of your commercial properties along US 29, which could be prime for redevelopment and densification to help support the city growth goals in the future.
Yeah, so
right.
Any other data points you think we need to be considering that we're not showing? All right. Sounds like.
Oh wait, sorry. This is Bill Palmer from UVA. I mean, I think one thing that we may want to put on there, and I can help you get that on there, would be high density UVA housing that's actually in the city. We have a few of those that would, just so when you look at that map, if it does end up in the final plan, that it does show like that density that does exist around UVA, that might not necessarily be privately owned, but is nevertheless high density housing for students.
Yeah.
Things like Brandon Avenue, and I mean, that's the main area down there, south of JPA.
Yeah, I think that would be a very good addition to our analysis.
Yeah, and I can totally help you get like where those actually are and what the densities, within a ballpark density. I know you kind of go off parcels, units per parcel or whatever, but or units per acre. We can probably back into that somehow.
Yeah, that's right. No, that would be very useful information for us to plug in. Thank you for that.
The only other thing that I'll note is that a lot of those sites that have not been built on yet have not been built on because they're very difficult to build on. They're on critical slopes. And it would be very expensive and frankly very difficult to get the planning commission to approve those sites being developed for residential use because they have on critical slopes that lead into critical waterways in the city.
So that's so there's now that even confirms further that there's very limited land to develop upon within the city. Sure.
What about city-owned properties? Would that be an interesting exercise? Or, housing authority sites?
Yeah, I think that would be an interesting exercise to look at what that looks like just in the context of the rest of the city.
Agree.
And we can do that just to confirm. We'll do that.
Yeah, definitely.
Sorry, I just had one quick question. Is there any way we can go back to the slide about the current either approved plans or development already, residential development already in progress?
Yeah, I think that's slide 21. Yep.
Great. Yeah. Perfect. Thank you. Is there any way, and I'm not sure if anybody else is interested, but just for my own personal kicks and giggles, is there any way we can get some type of analysis or breakdown of the price points of the units? Because I will be interested to know where we are. We say we have 890 plus units, but are they some affordable, all high end, all low income? I would just be interested to know that.
I think, do we need Missy to respond to that, Ron? Yeah, Missy.
Yeah, I think so.
And that's fine too. Just for future planning purposes, I just think that would be, since you have that information. I mean, it looks like you started working on that information. It would just be good to know.
Yeah, the information that they've used for this is a development review sheet that we have been maintaining that notes what's under review, what's approved, what's built, what's under construction. And so it gives basics. It would give a basic description of what is proposed for that site. It probably wouldn't get into the details of the price point of units at that point in time. We wouldn't necessarily have that information until construction is underway. But there are a few where we would know that at least X number would have to meet affordable requirements.
If there was, and maybe not for the consultants, but if that was something that we could work on getting that data for me for, that would be awesome. And I appreciate it. Thank you.
All right. Any other thoughts on the existing conditions? Otherwise, we can move on to talking about some recent and ongoing planning efforts.
Yeah. So there are a number of neighborhood studies and small area studies that have been completed throughout the city. We've noted 5 key plans or studies that have been implemented throughout the city, which are either approved or underway. And they all have underlying themes that provide some similarity. Many of them talk about increasing affordable housing opportunities, attracting and retaining employment and businesses, including or making sure that we preserve the community character within many of these, particularly the neighborhood areas. And then also the theme of environmental stewardship, making sure that we are being sustainably proactive as we begin to develop the city over time. So looking at all of these 5 plans, they begin to create some implications of what the future land use might look like within the city, because many of them have a land use component to them. So we'll be using that as an important starting point as we begin to look at future land uses within these study areas throughout the city. Next. The affordable housing plan, as you all know, is due for approval soon. It has some key recommendations as far as increasing affordable housing stock within the city. And this is something that we've been taking quite seriously as we begin to look to the future land use. So begin to see here, there are 4 key elements of those recommendations related to land use, include increasing the production of multifamily within the house, within the city, allowing soft density in single family neighborhoods. And again, that soft density would include things like accessory dwelling units, or allowing more than 1 unit per lot within residential areas. And then the third point, I spoke a little bit about that a moment ago, the ADUs, providing flexibility in the permitting process to allow the production of more of those affordable units. And then also the inclusionary zoning, increasing the production of affordable housing as part of particularly larger new developments. Next. So that leads us into a conversation about what the current residential zoning patterns look like within the city today.
Before we hop into that, I just want to ask, make sure, are there any other plans that you think we missed? Any sort of more recent efforts that weren't included in that discussion we just went through?
Just out of the list, did you add Riviera River corridor planning?
Yes.
Yeah, we have that included
Right.
as an ongoing effort.
Okay.
It's not really a land use plan; it's a transportation plan. But the regional transit plan is crucial. If we can, move people from parking to buses, that's the game.
There's also the Broadway blueprint plan that the county is currently working on right at the edge of our border. It's not technically in the city, but it does require getting through the city to get to that area.
Can you say that one more time, what that's called?
The Broadway blueprint.
Thank you. Thank you.
Great. Which area, which part of the city's boundary will that plan include?
That's down at the end of Woolen Mills, right where the new kind of redevelopment of the old Woolen Mill is.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Thanks.
And then, as Bill mentioned earlier, there's the UVA Brandon Avenue master plan that will be changing the Brandon Avenue area right off JPA or UVA.
Thanks.
Can we go back to slide 24? 24. Not certain how to even articulate this, because I don't want it to be misconstrued. But the bullet that talks to multifamily by right, it ends with a comment about speaking to reverse entrenched patterns of racial segregation. We just need to be very careful the way we talk about this. I served for a number of years on the Housing Authority, and there were lots of folks that were a little worried about our community neighborhoods becoming multicultural because they worried about a repeat of Vinegar Hill, where we attempted to do mixed use, mixed income, very diverse, to build the communities that were like that. But as a result, we broke up ethnic communities. And again, that made a lot of people nervous when we talked about it that way, because again, it brought Vinegar Hill to people's minds. So just keep that in mind as we think about it. The way we present that, and we think about what our real intent is, and when we think about the need to preserve the character of very important neighborhoods in Charlottesville.
Thank
Mhm.
you for that.
Yeah.
And I hope I didn't get myself in trouble with that one.
Actually, I've been thinking about that too. And I think that gets to equity. Who gets change? Who gets higher density? Is it only one kind of person, or is it more equitably shared?
Mhm. Thank you.
I mean, I know this has come up before too with how we talk about this stuff. If this slide were to be presented to stand on its own, I know we talked about there's sometimes layman's terms for like soft density and inclusionary zoning, just understanding, like if I was a member of the public, I mean, and actually maybe I don't even know if I could define soft density right off the bat.
Yeah, well, just for some clarification, so this is a page directly from the affordable housing plan. So we just pulled it in to give some of that context. But in that plan, everything is there's definitions, there's a glossary. But point taken, I think that's good for us to remember in the future. We need to make sure the context is fully in there. I also want to note this is the version of the recommendations prior to the version we sent in for next week's council meeting. So there has been some wording changes to this slide since then. Lyle, inclusionary zoning has been updated, for example.
This is Jody. Just one more thing, following up on Bill Palmer's observation about Brandon. The university also has a plan for the Ivy corridor that is, talking about hotels, academic buildings, and additional development that is bound to have an impact on the surrounding communities.
Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, I had another thought too with like, and I don't know how we want to treat that, but it may be a matter of just updating the UVA boundary that's shown there. So some of those areas that aren't currently covered in those previous slides by the UVA boundary could have that blue hatch on them. Things like the Ivy Corridor, Brandon, our health system, which are all UVA owned and being developed as such. I don't know how how you guys think about that. I don't want to tell you say we have to do that, but we may want to more accurate. It's basically more accurately showing the UVA footprint, I think is.
I think we did get the same feedback by email from a community member as well. So I think that's certainly something we want to make sure we're representing accurately the UVA's footprint.
Yeah, and a lot of those plans are online.
Yeah.
In terms of like what's actually envisioned for long term for those sites.
Yeah, I think we used maybe an older layer of a UVA boundary. So I think if we we'll look to update that.
Yeah.
That being said, I'm going to suggest we go on to the next piece, but then if there are other plans that people think of that we should be thinking about, feel free to put them in the chat or bring them up maybe toward the end of the meeting.
All right, thank you. So I'll reintroduce myself again. My name is Max Pastori. I'm with RHI with the CBO Plans Together team. Nice to meet you all. I'm just going to speak about the small portion about the kind of the zoning portion of the residential part of this presentation. Unlike the rest of the material that's been presented up to this point, we've really been talking about up to this point, really just the land uses, right? So that's things that are kind of more general. What kind of housing do you want to see? What kind of development do you want to see at a very high level? Doesn't always have legal power behind it. But for this portion that I'll be talking about, we're talking actually about zoning, which does have legal power to it and does say what can and cannot be built on property. So we wanted to just kind of bring this up because this is really, we think where there's a lot of interest and ideas related to soft density that gets kind of involved here. And again, just to repeat, the idea of soft density is anything that is kind of the stuff that's between your single family house on the one end of the spectrum and your apartment building on the other. So that's like quadruplex or quadplexes, triplexes, duplexes, townhomes, anything that's kind of in that missing middle, so to speak. So basically the map that you see on the screen speaks to all of the areas that you could theoretically have a residential unit in by the zoning code. So anything in that light yellow cream color is basically anything that's exclusively residential. So that's, again, your single family detached all the way to your multifamily, but you can't have any sort of mixed use in there. You can't have apartments on the ground floor, or you can't have commercial uses on the ground floor, that sort of thing. And so that purple color is where the mixed use comes in, where you can still technically have your residential above, but it also allows for different uses too. And it seems like we just got a note in the chat saying that is this the right boundary for UVA?
Or at least much closer. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, we can. Yeah, although the western lands that are shown as UVA is not actually owned by UVA. That's all foundation properties,
Right.
but that's not in the city. So I don't. Yeah.
Perfect. That's good to know.
But yeah, the city portion of this is accurate.
Okay, great. And just as a high level, the green stuff that you see on this map is your open spaces, your parks. Blue are school properties, and that does include public and private properties, or private schools rather. Next slide, please. So kind of digging into the bigger, taking a step deeper into the residential stuff, particularly about your single family detached housing. So the stuff that you think of as, not your townhomes, not your duplexes, just, a house that does not share a wall with anybody else or any other property. So that is a good chunk of the city still. If looking at just the total area or total properties within the city, not total land area, but properties, it accounts for just over 52% of property in the city. So it's a good chunk of property. And again, pretty much it's anything that's shown in gray within that is anything that is not that zoning class. So that's anything that could be from commercial to other types of residential zoning, but it's not single family detached. Next slide. And then what we try to do is overlay on top of that in red. You can see all these red kind of squares and dots everywhere. Anything that's red is a property or a property parcel that has something other than a single family detached house on it, even though the area is technically zoned for that. So the red would be things like duplexes, apartments, condos, other types of small scale multifamily housing, things that you might not even notice on the ground. Maybe there's a door in the back for a basement apartment or something like that, and you just can't tell. Sometimes it is a bit more visible, but a lot of this sort of what we call missing middle, or the types of housing that we don't typically build anymore today, or post World War II, those duplexes, the triplexes and things like that, probably do exist for a variety of reasons within the city, within these districts, but a good chunk of them, I would imagine, are probably pre-World War II. So a lot of the stuff that we did traditionally before zoning was really had a lot of teeth and did a lot of regulation. So it's just something to think about when we kind of talk about the idea of missing middle housing going forward, whether that's the affordability or housing affordability plan and things like that. This is not a new concept. This is a really old tradition that in fact exists within these residential districts already. Next slide. And so this slide has a lot of information on it, and I want to just kind of go through quickly some of the the methods behind the madness here, so to speak. But basically, this map tries to explain, kind of through our own analysis of where you could theoretically build an ADU based on the provisional use system that exists today. So it's not technically, by provisional meaning you can't just kind of put in an application and it's approved. You do have to go through a separate little process. It's not like building a single family house necessarily, but it's still not terribly cumbersome. But the idea here is that basically anything in brown is where you couldn't build an ADU theoretically, because either the zoning is just not lined up for it. So in most cases, what that means in this map is it's a residential university zone. So that's the area that's kind of hems in. You can see the kind of the brown solid portion that is kind of showing Venable and JPA and Lewis Mountain. Those are just a specific type of residential zoning that explicitly does not allow for ADUs on it. Everything else that kind of shows that speckly stuff, that is mostly to do with ownership. So something that we did as a very blunt instrument to understand whether or not you can build an EDU is whether or not it's owned by an individual. So if typically, with ADUs, there's a owner occupant requirement. So if someone wants to build an ADU on their property, there's a requirement that that person lives either in the main house, the principal dwelling unit, or in the backyard in that ADU or wherever it is in the property. So anything that's brown, that's not the Venable or Jefferson Park Avenue or Lewis Mountain, that would be because it's either owned by an LLC, it's owned by a church, it's owned by some sort of organization that's not an individual. And I think, so generally based on that kind of that high level of analysis, we found that roughly 1 out of every 3 residential properties could actually permit an ADU in these zones. Next slide. I think that's the end of it. Any questions about the residential zoning aspect, those 4 slides that we presented?
And again, recognizing that the future land use map is not zoning, but the goal here is to put out a land use map that will then lead to potential to looking at the zoning. So, we want to make sure we know what's in there now as context, but we're not putting this out here to say the future land use map needs to be exactly in line with the zoning at all. That's not why we're showing this. We just want everyone to know what's in the zoning right now. Oh, thank you for that note, Rory. Okay, well, thank you, Max. And that being said, I think I will pass it back to Ron to talk through the future land use framework, starting with some of the work you all did in 2017, 2018.
So we, as Jennifer had mentioned, we started with the work that has been done in the past as an important starting point to understand how the city is being thought of as far as future land use planning. This was an analysis completed by the previous Planning Commission that looked at the links between employment and housing and how we can begin to correlate where major points of employment are located within the city, where people live, and connections in between, and how there may be opportunities for new growth nodes within the city. So in this diagram, you can see downtown is a major hub. If you remember back when we showed the diagrams that had the employment node, and you can really begin to see downtown is a major employment center for the city. This diagram really begins to illustrate that as a central hub with a series of smaller community hubs around that center, extending all the way out to the US 29 corridor and those periphery areas. And we had mentioned that there are emerging employment clusters around, particularly around the southeast area of the city. So this diagram began to make correlations of that, the center downtown hub, and how connections could be made in between the hub and the surrounding secondary hubs throughout the city.
And I want to note, Ron, before you move on from that, if you don't mind, we know there was a lot of other analyses that went on. I believe the planning commissioner who did a lot of this work is on the line watching. Thank you, Kurt. But I want to note, we have looked at all of the analyses that were done previously, but we pulled out this one as kind of one of the key components.
That's right. Next. In 2018, there was some thinking around what the future land use map could be. And that thinking is illustrated here. This is the map from 2018. So you can see that the areas in purple are higher intensity areas. Areas in yellow are lower intensity. So this diagram began to illustrate some early thinking about where intensity of development can occur throughout the city. So you can see here the downtown core is more of a high intensity place, stretching along West Main Street towards the university. And then up McIntyre Road to the north towards US 250. And then of course, along the US 29 corridor, where it is a major destination corridor today, but there are underutilized properties along that corridor, and underutilized properties could be low density commercial uses such as shopping centers that may be ripe for development. So this plan really began to look at that area as a potential growth zone. And then the same along River Road to the east, and then south along Monticello Road at the southern gateway of the city, and then along 5th Street to the south, and then along JPA to the west of the city.
And if I could interrupt you again, Ron, I'm sorry. Just like the previous map, we know there was a lot of other work that happened during this time. We've been using this map as an example because this was sort of the last map that was, I believe, discussed in a larger public process. But we know there has been other work done. There's not only in terms of the key, thinking about the definitions of these places, but also different levels of intensity maps that showed different areas that had been discussed in some planning commission meetings previously. So I just wanted to recognize that.
Yeah, that's important. Next. So we have completed community engagement as part of the overall comprehensive plan update process. There are key themes that have been derived from those community engagement activities. The ones you see in pink specifically relate to land use planning. Again, introducing affordable housing throughout the entirety of the city, recognizing the need for racial equality related to where people live, and avoiding gentrification, displacement, and recognizing historic land uses. Creating and identifying safe, strong, sustainable neighborhoods for everyone. We want Charlottesville to be a very inclusive place, and that's something that we need to build into our land use planning thinking. Utilizing tools for land use and urban design elements, including increasing density where appropriate to allow for flexibility in housing types, promoting walkability and bikeability and proximity to transit. We know that Charlottesville is a very compact city, so there are a lot of opportunities to create a very walkable, transit-oriented place, and that's something that we've recognized as part of this engagement. And then parks and park connectivity. Charlottesville has a lot of neighborhood parks and trails and other natural resource amenities, so we want to make sure that we're building in opportunities for connectivity to those special places. Next. And then as part of the comp plan exercise, we are developing vision statements which serve to guide the different elements of the comprehensive plan. Here are a few vision statements related to land use planning, which are under development. These were the last iterations based on the November 2020 draft. And as we begin to hear from you all and progress the land use planning exercise, we will update the vision statements as appropriate to make sure that we capture all of the viewpoints that we hear from the community.
And we're currently updating this vision statement as well as the other chapter vision statements based on the input from November and December. So this is that previous version that was reviewed with the community.
Next. So from there, we have begun to distill planning objectives, and this is something that will evolve. I think we're going to learn a lot from our discussion tonight, that we can begin to refine these objectives and add to them. But for now, we have identified 6. We want to build upon the land use recommendations included in the city's previous planning efforts. Many of these small area plans that have been developed as part of the city planning processes have included extensive community engagement, and the community has spoke to how they want their neighborhoods to be shaped for the future. So we want to use that as a starting point for our land use planning and incorporate as much of that knowledge into the land use planning process as possible. We want to create equitable opportunities for density increases throughout the city and make sure that we're distributing density citywide as much as possible, such that it becomes an equitable place. We want to consider increasing density around community amenities such as shopping, employment centers, and transit. We want to promote a walkable, inclusive place. So those are very important elements to make sure that we have connectivity to. We want to develop opportunities to infill at vacant properties or redevelop underutilized land within the city. We know that we're very limited on vacant properties, and as was mentioned earlier, many of the vacant lands within the city are not really prime for development. So focusing on where there's areas of underutilized properties is going to be important. And then we want to maximize access to public open spaces, as well as continue the synergy between what's happening in the city and what's happening in the surrounding county areas. Next.
Sorry, Ron, I think we had a question on the agenda, so I want to make sure we stop and just open it up briefly to see if there were any thoughts on those objectives. We can also have that discussion as we go on, but were there any, did anyone have anything they wanted to share on that previous slide?
I'm actually still thinking back in existing plans. Our bike ped plan we should be considering. And I just pasted that in chat 2015.
Got it. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
And on a similar note, I feel like an explicit objective needs to be, and it's kind of in the land use vision statements, but creating opportunities for people to get out of their cars on a day-to-day basis in order to achieve our climate goals.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I just want to be really clear that land use map, the draft land use map that we displayed earlier, that's the 2017 draft.
Okay. We'll update that moving forward.
Okay. Well, it looks like there's no other comments on these. So
Let me, before we do that, I want to make certain we understand what Rory is attempting to suggest. I think, Rory, you think we ought to be using the 2018 map.
Yeah, well, I mean, I just think we should be clear about what we're starting from, right? Our goal here is to make a new map regardless. I think we've discussed a lot over the last 2 years that our plan was to start kind of where we left off. So, at the very least, I know so the last thing, as I understand it, the last map that we presented in public was at the early December 2018 council meeting. And that was the more intense map. And there was a work session after that where I think we had agreed to roll the map part of it back, but keeping the sort of legend of the other map. And so this map with this legend is sort of the right colors in the right places, but meaning kind of very different things or really kind of vague things, since it doesn't really mean much of anything, to be honest.
Without that larger legend with it.
Yeah.
I think, okay. Do others agree with that? We've seen the legend with notes on. Sorry, go ahead, Lyle.
I took notes on that because I'm a maniac. We developed the legend, and then the thought was that we would develop a map to the legend, but we never did that.
Got it. Okay.
So this is Jody. I had an email conversation with Jenny earlier, pointing just out what Roy just put out, that that was the 2017 map from very early on. In fact, we were still doing public engagement. So that was a draft before we even started meeting aggressively and talking about how we can increase the development densities and incentives that would help. And we went through a lot of iterations. November 18, a draft map there that I have a copy of shows far denser mapping suggestions for the different neighborhoods. So really, I was bothered by the quote on that slide that said that there was really no increase in density being proposed. No, we had gotten to the point of knowing we needed to increase density, and we were working very hard on that. And we had draft maps that showed the direction where we're going in. We just weren't, we got stopped before we finished that direction.
Understood. Yeah, the comment on the slide was definitely in reference to that, the previous map, but understood that you all had those discussions and recognized that need. So thank you for mentioning that. With that, I think let's dive into the land use framework, Ron.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry, you can go back one slide. Thank you.
So taking in all the information that we learned, we developed this draft land use framework. And again, this is not a solidified plan. It's just a representation of some early ideas and thinking, combining some of the analysis that we've done, information contained in existing neighborhood plans and small area plans, and also the analysis completed by the previous planning commission and the maps from 2017. So on this map, you can see the corridors that stick out on the map, which we're calling these urban mixed use placemaking corridors. We're trying to think about ways that we can concentrate development along key areas of the city that could be ripe for development, and also begin to support higher density land use, which in the end would support the city's objective to increase affordable housing throughout the city. So we identified a series of linear corridors throughout the city, one being the US 29 corridor, JPA, Preston Avenue, McIntyre Road, West Main Street, High Street, 5th Street, and 250 towards Pantops as major corridors that we believe could be the beginnings of areas that could support higher intensity development. The width of those corridors for that more intensive development could be a 1 block from the center line of the road, or it could be a 5-minute walk. I think the details of how density develops along those corridors are to be determined, and we want your feedback on that. But we have identified corridors that could support higher development intensity. Connecting those corridors or anchoring those corridors are nodes. So downtown, the strategic investment area, US 29, the River Road corridor, 5th Street, the Fontaine area, Belmont. We've identified these areas as potential major nodes. So thinking about the analysis that the previous planning commission created, where you're beginning to create linkages between housing and places of employment, you begin to see how that is starting to flesh itself out. The US 29 downtown areas being those major employment hubs of the city. And then we have these mixed use corridors that begin to connect all of these different high intensity nodes together. And then we also included smaller, more neighborhood scale nodes. So you can see the smaller circles distributed throughout the map are creating those secondary neighborhood scale nodes so that we can get some sense of place or places of orientation within some of these neighborhoods that could create places where you can get a gallon of milk, or you can have other small employment type opportunities. But we wanted to create opportunities outside of the major nodes for those community amenities. Again, those corridors that connect the major nodes are places of transit. So all of these corridors have or currently have transit access. So we are proposing more intensive uses along corridors with transit. And then we're also taking advantage of those underutilized commercial properties, particularly along US 29. We have some of that type of land use along River Road where it's less developed. And then along McIntyre Road in the industrial area, just to the west of McIntyre Road, where some of those properties are already beginning to turn over use. So this was a kind of a preliminary idea dump, if you will, that developed, just to begin to steer the conversation, gives us something to talk about moving forward. And I think it would be great if we could get your initial feedback on some of these initial ideas.
And before we jump in, I know there will be a lot of discussion on this. I wanted to see, Ron, if you wouldn't mind maybe speaking just really briefly about the rationale for where the smaller nodes are located. I think just to make sure everyone is aware, we know there may be other ones you all would identify, or you might suggest adjusting these locations, but can you give some background on our placement of those?
Yeah, certainly. Cherry Avenue, along the Cherry Avenue corridor, we have identified a neighborhood node at that location, which is a result of the Cherry Avenue small area plan, which called for a small neighborhood node with a mix of uses. So we've identified that on the plan. Monticello Avenue Gateway that we're calling on the south end of the city. There are some underutilized property there is an exit ramp from Interstate 64 at that location, so that could be a prime gateway into 1 second, please. Sorry.
I think someone may have started up a vacuum. He'll be right back. I don't want to. Yes. I want to let him pick up where he left off instead of trying to be Ron. Here we go. Welcome back, Ron.
So sorry about that. We have the office maintenance staff beginning to clean the office, and they turned on the vacuum cleaner, so I didn't want that distraction. But again, Cherry Avenue, Monticello Avenue Gateway, Cherry Avenue South, along the Cherry Avenue corridor, there may be an opportunity to create another node, a small neighborhood oriented place that could begin to anchor kind of the southwest area outside of the Cherry Avenue neighborhood. We have Woolen Mills, which has already been identified as a place that could become a community place. Downtown Belmont, an area that already has some commercial development. We think there's an opportunity to build upon that by creating a neighborhood scale place there. And then to the north, as you can see in the mapping, the Preston Avenue High Street area south has a lot of potential for infill development. Looking north from High Street, Preston Avenue, particularly along the US 250 corridor, because of the urban form, these are a lot of low density residential communities with more suburban land use configurations. We did want to identify some places that could support more of a small neighborhood node condition. So Dairy Road, there's a ramp from US 250 to Dairy Road that could be an opportunity, as well as Locust Road. We've identified that as a potential node, and what these nodes may be and the intensity of development of these nodes are to be determined, but we did want to identify places on the plan that could support these more neighborhood oriented places within these existing neighborhoods.
Thank you, Ron. We can talk more about that too, but I want to note there was a question from Gary about the UVA node, the blue bubble on UVA, and what that might be called or what we're envisioning with that. So can you speak to that a bit?
Yeah, so that the bubble for UVA is a product of the employment center node, and we just diagrammatically located a circle because it's a major node on the western periphery of the city. I think some of our discussion about including those areas around UVA that has the higher intensity residential uses today, we want to pull that in, but UVA and the area around UVA could certainly be a node that could support more intensive uses around the UVA area. To be determined what that looks like, but we did identify UVA, the area around UVA, as an area that could be supportive of that employment node.
Thanks, Ron.
Yeah, I mean, that makes sense. It's just, I think a question for this map is whether you want to have it be that lavender color, or, you know, just like anything else on the map, or if it does need to be kind of called out separately.
Yeah, we talked about a couple of months ago that it is a unique feature of the city. Other university towns do have zoning and or nomenclature that talk about the interface between the city and the university, and some things that might be different in that area. So I'm really glad to see that it's a different color. I don't think it should be just because of employment. I do think you have to treat it as a unique possibility for you know, what's permissible or what's not permissible.
Right. I agree.
Looks like Liz has a recommendation for revision in the map.
Yes, thank you, Liz. Liz noted that the Woolen Mill node it appears to be maybe shown over the cemetery, so we should reconsider that location on the map. Thank you for mentioning that. Certainly was not our intention to develop
it.
this.
It sort of brings up a bigger question as to the rationale behind creating nodes where there maybe, I'm not sure if the intent was to maybe have that closer to Woolen Mills new development, or the or Mead Park, like where there is some, you know, sometimes there's a farmer's market there. Like I just don't know what the rationale there is. And also with the Locust Road Gateway, that seems to be in the location of a very tight on-off ramp at 250. So it just, you know, makes me a little confused, those specific ones.
Yeah, so the Woolen Mills, I think diagrammatically we should shift that circle over, but there is it's semi-industrial in parts of that area. There are some large parcels in that location, so we thought that there would be an opportunity to consider some mix of employment and perhaps residential uses as part of that area. As an overall concept. Locust Road Gateway, you know, we're being visionary. You know, this is a forward-thinking plan. You know, we have not set a horizon year for what the comprehensive plan would be, but perhaps in the future, if we have a plan that says we want to create a place here at this location, maybe in the future, we can begin to take steps to make that happen. So, you know, it may be a tight interchange now, but you know, if the conditions are ripe enough and it's something that we want to make happen, perhaps we can identify opportunities to make improvements that can make that implementation possible. And again, if we figure that some of these nodes we want to take out, we can certainly do that. We can move them around. We're certainly open to all those possibilities.
So I want to point out that in the Planning Commission's work from a couple years ago, we were proposing or in the process of adding a category called neighborhood amenity. Are what you're proposing here something similar or inspired by that discussion, that proposal? We were actually identifying areas of the city where it would go within, without specifying exactly where it would go, but recognizing neighborhoods that needed to have a low density commercial use within walking distance, a pedestrian scale walking distance, commercial center to serve the neighborhoods and not the city at large.
Exactly. So that's exactly why I want to include these smaller circles, which are, you know, juxtaposed to the larger downtown core and the strategic investment area. So we did envision these to be kind of smaller scale, neighborhood oriented, contextual places that could support small employment, perhaps some neighborhood retail, you know, again, a place to buy a gallon of milk, etc., that could support these neighborhoods, especially if we begin to think about increasing soft density. So one color that I did not discuss much on this plan is the yellow. So we're showing, equal distribution of soft density as one approach throughout the city. So if we begin to think about, soft density, more units per lot, etc., these smaller neighborhood scale places become ever important, because now we're creating these walkable places that support the increase of density within these neighborhoods, or increases of populations within these neighborhoods over time.
And with the soft density, it could work out that, for example, on the future land use map, there is a more broad soft density sort of throughout the city, similar to this. And in the zoning rewrite, the next step, there can be discussions about how that looks. I mean, so soft density, which is a term now we know, we want to make sure we define that every time we talk about it. But soft density is basically missing middle housing, right? So it's everywhere from those ADUs, duplex, triplex, quadplex. That's why we say soft density, because it's shorter than saying that. But so when we say soft density in the yellow here, that encompasses all of those, but we're not saying that all of these areas should all have quadplex, for example.
Yeah.
That it might be that in the zoning, there's a broader discussion about where those specific areas might be.
That's right.
I want to make sure, Jody, that did we respond to the sort of what you had mentioned about the previous process? I wasn't sure. Was your were you concerned about us showing specific locations as opposed to allowing more flexibility, or were you just wanting us to see where we were coming from?
I was just pointing out the difference, and
Okay.
but that we had a similar idea, and saw a similar need to what you're recognizing, and so I'm reassured with that.
Yeah, we built on that previous sort of analysis you all had started.
So I'd like to kind of better understand, what the placement and the size of each of these nodes kind of means. Like, to me, I'm going to try to get can you guys see my mouse if I nose around? Do you see that? Okay, drawing instead. So like for me, like downtown, it seems to be on downtown proper. I don't know if that's working either. But like downtown, as we saw from our jobs map a couple slides ago, is the very largest, most thing everyone's super attracted to. And so like to me, it doesn't really make sense to include kind of this area, just above, or to not include. Whereas, it's basically the same dimensions for downtown as it is for McIntyre Road, even though, one of them is the job core of the whole city. And then, I think we also need to pay attention on some of those corridors, especially McIntyre Road and the northern part of Fish Street, to the topography, which I think make it pretty difficult to do significant development along there. And it kind of seems to me that or you guys kind of base this off of where the purple areas are in the previous map. And that's kind of forming the basis. I just want to be really clear that the purple that was on near McIntyre Road there, that was the Harris Street kind of industrial corridor. And then the kind of very northern part of that is McIntyre Plaza, more of a mixed use. There's apartments and retail and stuff. And then, downtown Belmont is actually kind of more over here. And then we have this purple area over here where there's retail, that sort of thing, kind of strip malls. And then there's that big scrap yard. And I think that's maybe what you're going for with the Woolen Mills dot there. So just want to be clear that, that's kind of more in this area. I also feel like Avon Street is a little bit omitted here, kind of along here. So there's a lot going on in the county on their side of Avon. And I think that probably makes sense as something of a corridor. And I also feel like in the Cherry Avenue plan, that is seen more as a corridor, and with more than kind of that little node. Even now there's more than that small node there. So sorry, my Zoom upgraded and now everything's weird and I can't find my annotation menu, but I will try to get that back so I can get rid of all these markups. But like, yeah, I just want to be clear that we kind of have like a hierarchy of what those things mean, and that they do mean different things in different places.
No, I think you're absolutely right. In this first iteration of the framework, we're being specific and unspecific at the same time. And non-specific at the same time. So we, generically drew some of these ovals and areas as very general without getting too precise. But I definitely see, moving forward, we will begin to scale to fit these areas where appropriately needed. And then you point out the downtown Belmont. I think that's a really good observation. So that circle was getting at encompassing the existing downtown Belmont area, as well as some of those underutilized properties near the railroad track. So we drew a generic circle to encompass the whole thing. But I think you're right. When we get into the next iteration, we really need to more shape these places according to the land existing conditions, taking in account topography and other constraints that will begin to refine these preliminary recommendations for sure.
Cool. And then, yeah, I guess the other things I'd add are, sorry, I forgot to mention the Ivy corridor. Bill kind of mentioned it earlier. UVA is going to develop a lot of that, but the parts that are still private, it's going to make sense, I think, to put some more density there. Also up at kind of the Greenbrier intersection with the county. And then with corridors, I almost wonder if it always makes sense to have a full link all the way along the corridor. Like I can imagine JPA coming down, JPA extended, eventually getting to the really big retail area at the end of Fifth Street, which it seems like the Fifth Street block kind of ends a little short of. Like, the beginning parts of JPA, I can maybe, see, being part of a denser corridor. I don't know about the whole extent of it. And then, maybe somewhere down the line, like where Press Spring Beach Club is, could make sense as a node in the more distant future. I mean, I guess I'd like to understand, kind of what the rationale is for a corridor rather than, just nodes or like, I mean, I don't know.
Yeah.
I hesitate a little bit at saying we want to put, all new density and apartments and stuff on high traffic corridors, because, there's good reasons that like, really high traffic corridors are not great to live on. And putting all the houses there means that a lot more people are subjected to those negative externalities. So.
Yeah, I think those are really, really good observations. The rationale behind the corridors were creating these, what we're calling the placemaking corridors that connect these major nodes or points of destination. So if you're a visitor along the US 29 corridor and you're coming from the north out of the county, if you want to get downtown, you would likely take either Preston Avenue to get downtown or US 250. So then McIntyre, US 250 is a limited access roadway, so we didn't include it as a corridor, but your major gateway could include McIntyre, which is a direct point of access from 250 to downtown. And they begin to create the front door image of the city of Charlottesville. Right now, you pointed out that some of these major corridors aren't as attractive as they could be today, but as we begin to implement projects along these corridors, there's opportunities for streetscape enhancements and other placemaking opportunities to really define what those placemaking corridors are and how we can create more transit-oriented corridors. Perhaps in the future, Preston Avenue could have a BRT or some other transit-oriented use. So we just started to identify the makings of what some of these transit-oriented places could be. And I think you made another good point about corridors versus nodes. Perhaps Preston Avenue is not just one linear high intensity place. Maybe there are places along Preston Avenue that are defined as an opportunity. So I think that's something that we will explore moving forward for sure.
And we, you know, on Preston specifically, we know there's been a lot of discussion about Preston and Grady. I don't know if you all have, you know, opinions on that, whether that should be a node. I know it was in previous plans, it was sort of shown in some plans as a node. So, you know, that's building on what Ron said about Preston. And then I'm glad you mentioned the transit. You know, it's not only the corridors are where transit exists now, but it can also then help focus investment in transit, as well as you know, bicycle pedestrian amenities too. So I hear where you're coming from, Rory, with why you don't always want to focus where people are already driving, but that can also lead to further improvements in non-motorized. So
Yeah.
I mean, I'd like to get maybe some more people's opinion on the Cherry Avenue stuff that Rory was talking about, whether that corridor might warrant urban mixed use placemaking corridor status based on the small area plan that's been developed. And then also along that line, the Cherry Avenue node, whether that might rise to the concentrated mixed use node or not. I don't know, it feels a little bit like bigger than some of these other ones like Willow Mills and Cherry Avenue South. So,
well, we can also consider having different scales of corridors too. You know, especially if it is identified in the small area plan, you know, we will be looking at incorporating that, assuming that that all moves forward. So we'll want to make sure it's identified in some way on this. So that might be one way to consider it, is having a different scale of corridor.
Yeah, that's right.
But in reference to Bill's point, does anyone else have thoughts on the Cherry Avenue thing? Lyle, I see you had a hand up.
I agree with Bill's point, and I have my own point to make if we're done with Bill's. Are we done with Bill's?
Maybe not. Let's deal with Bill's a little bit longer. Relating to Willow Mills, what are you suggesting as it relates to Cherry Avenue? Are you wondering why Cherry Avenue is getting a little more attention in this?
Oh no, I was saying I felt like, you know, based on the small area plan that's been developed for Cherry Avenue, it feels that it might rise to a higher level than something like Willow Mills or Locust Road Gateway. I mean, I know it's all the same color, but
I mean, if you've been over in that area, I mean, you've seen how much development's going on, how much commercial development's going on over there. And you've seen how many open spaces there are that could be developed. I'd hate to demote Willow Mills. I know we're focusing on Cherry Avenue because, you know, we've got lots of folks that live there.
Sorry, yeah, I wasn't trying to demote Willow Mills at all, because I think you're right. I think that there's a lot of opportunity over there as well, just not on the cemetery where this dot is shown.
But I'm talking where the brewery is.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Factory ought to be, used to be, all those vacant lots and where all the breweries are that are over there. There's a lot of opportunity to develop over there.
Yeah, and I mean, maybe it's more of a downtown Belmont / Willow Mills type zone in there, because it does kind of bleed together. But you know, I feel like Cherry Avenue is maybe just not getting enough oomph on this.
I agree. I just don't want to promote Cherry Avenue at the detriment of Willow Mills, because there's just so much that can be done over there and so much that's already happening. Okay, anyway. Wow.
So I'm thinking about, you know, sort of major nodes, major land uses, just big places on the map, places people go for work or for other reasons. And the two that jump out to me that I don't see here, UVA Medical Center, just gigantic. It's the most intensive land use in the region. And I think in many ways is distinct from UVA. And also Charlottesville High School. It's a huge footprint. It's all government-owned land, gigantic parking lot, and all, I think, single-family zoning around it. Just a massive opportunity.
Yeah, we'll take a look at that. I think those are good observations for additions.
And yeah, I would definitely recommend taking a look at some of those later maps that we made. We were specifically thinking about, you know, kind of where to put new nodes, and particularly, you know, where to put, like, you know, smaller little mixed use things, kind of neighborhood amenity type things. And I think we had used like hatch marks or something. So there could be some good ideas in there that we came up with 2 years ago, and I don't really remember.
Yeah, sounds good.
So I know we're having some general discussion. I just want to note, we did have 3 sort of discussion questions in the agenda. So I'm just going to say them and then we can continue the discussion and you can respond to those if you'd like. But the questions we were thinking about was, 1, do you think this general framework aligns with the discussions that have taken place over the last year, both us with you, but us with the community, other discussions we've had about land use, about affordable housing and whatnot. Second question was.
So Jenny, if I can recommend, because I know how we are, maybe if you want us to land the planes on each question, maybe we ought to take the question individually.
Sure, that's fine.
We'll forget and we won't get all your questions answered. So why don't you poll the board on question number 1 and see if there's anything else the team would like.
I will do that. So does anyone have thoughts on whether this aligns generally with the discussions that have taken place in this process? And I would say the previous discussions you had leading to this as well, because those have been part of our discussion throughout. All right, seeing some thumbs up. Okay, and we know that doesn't mean you necessarily agree with everything that's on here, but you're saying the general framework, you're okay with that. Gary, did you have something you want to note?
I didn't know if you were going to ask this specifically, but I just was remembering the discussion about having a different type of designation for the UVA area. So whatever that means, it's there. So I like it. Thank you.
Sure.
Yeah, and I'd like to piggyback on that. This kind of fits into the next question sort of too, but somewhere in between. Like I do think we should really think about the UVA area in a special way. I think one of the biggest concerns that people have all over the city, and particularly in neighborhoods adjacent to UVA that are not UVA neighborhoods, is this idea of UVA students kind of like just trickling out and expanding and putting pressure on surrounding neighborhoods. And especially as UVA grows, as it did a lot over the last decade by over 2,000 people on grounds, and it's going to continue to do. And we have areas that are like student areas, right? Like JPA and like the Rugby Road area. And then there's, some little kind of tucked in kind of historic areas that are like professor oriented in there as well. But like, if we can take those existing student areas and fit a lot more students and stuff in there, that's going to relieve a lot of that student pressure on the outside. And, in a lot of ways, I think we've seen that with the West Main developments. We've heard from the school district that there are a lot more families in 10th and Page and in Fifeville from where students were spilling out. I think what people dislike a little bit about the West Main development is that we let the students spill out of their existing areas, right? We took some new areas and we said, these are students now. And I think people maybe even dislike that more than maybe the built form of that area if it were non-students. And so I think we've really overlooked those areas, 14th to Rugby and JPA and Fontaine. And as UVA continues to grow, I'd like to see us put a lot more effort into allowing more growth there so that they stop spilling out.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay. Oh, Bill, did you want to add to that? Or Liz, sorry.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's probably a good point that Rory just made. Those areas that he mentioned were upzoned, I don't know how many years ago, 20 years ago or so, and did result in a lot of larger apartment buildings along JPA and in the Rugby 14th Street area. But yeah, like you're saying, it sounds like you're saying maybe re-examining that and not just saying, oh, well, it's already been upzoned. Maybe that's enough. Maybe there's more.
Yeah, and something that came up kind of last March or so, but ended up getting derailed by COVID with a student housing developer was that like, even in those upzoned areas, like along 14th Street, the university high density zones, it doesn't even allow the highest densities in our use matrix, or even the two highest densities in our use matrix. So a lot of those are kind of older-ish, large parking lot, kind of what we think of as our R3 zone now. And then there's also areas in there that didn't really get upzoned so much. Or there's even some that are like, R1U and R2U, but they're full of students. And so, those zones ban any house with more than 3 unrelated people. But like every single one of them has 6 or more unrelated students living in them, which just ends up with bad all around. They have no leverage against their landlord to report violations to the city, because the landlord can say, oh, you're living here illegally anyway, you'll just get it, we can just evict you, or the city will kick you out. I've heard some horror stories there. It's bad. And it makes you wonder, why are we preserving single family homes that are just, packed full of students anyway?
Thanks for, yeah, well, I think we'll look at ways to consider more of that area around UVA. I will get some precedents for that, as well as some of the zoning changes that exist now.
And I just wanted to, it's kind of, what got me thinking about it is when Lyle noted UVA medical area being considered, and I don't know if what he meant was being considered as a node or place of, increased intensity, but we should also take into consideration the legacy of UVA and the hospital property, especially on encroaching in those historically African-American neighborhoods. And that sort of leads into a bigger picture question, which we don't have to get into right now, but, which is how, when the entire area is shown as this soft density everywhere, the question then is, how do we specify what areas density may be threatening to those communities versus where it may be appropriate and targeted?
Taking some notes, and that gets to sort of that third question that we had, but I think we can, I would say we can talk about that now. I think, well, first of all, on your UVA point well taken. We know there's a legacy, not only Vinegar Hill, but Gospel Hill is part of the history there, and other history with UVA. So keeping that in mind, I think, is a good point. But as far as the soft density conversation goes, we touched on really briefly earlier, we've got this shown all over now as sort of an underlay to this whole map. And it could be that the comprehensive plan explores outlining specific areas that could be threatened by especially the higher end of soft density. But it could also be that there's an underlay of soft density in the comprehensive plan, and the zoning, can then take on that and look at how we might target certain types of density on that scale of soft density to certain areas, or make sure that some areas are more protected if need be. So I think that's my sort of vague answer to your question. But the other piece of this that I want to make sure we remember is that the affordable housing plan exists in tandem with this. And land use is one piece of this, and we know that if the land use and then the comp plan, or excuse me, the comprehensive plan land use map changes, and then zoning changes, that can lead to potential displacement and other impacts. But there are sort of subsidy tools, tenants' rights tools, other tools that are being proposed that can both help. I'm sorry if the cat is going crazy. I'm sorry if that's coming through my microphone. I think that can help to strengthen some communities against those unintended or other impacts of those zoning changes, and it can help people to benefit from those changes as well. So I think we're keeping those in mind with the land use changes. But Yeah, which is to say, I think we need to consider that continuing it as we go forward here, how we can make sure that we're considering those potential consequences of soft density. That was a long answer to your question. Did that respond to your question?
No, that's exactly what, you know, the conversation I'm interested in continuing to have. So thank you.
I just pasted into the chat a new to me study from Portland, from their upzoning to fourplexes, looking at displacement, and actually found it prevented displacement, which I was pleasantly surprised by.
Yes, I thought that was an interesting study. I saw you posted that on Twitter. I took a look. I think it's so Portland, as many of you may know, did look at sort of changes to their single family zoning. And so then they looked at what are the potential impacts of that. And they noted that while it was less than they might have anticipated, there were certain neighborhoods that were more potentially impacted, but they talked with that potential mechanisms to mitigate those circumstances. So I think just as a conversation we just had, we need to keep that in mind as we move forward. But thank you, Lal. I would suggest folks take a look at that. I found it interesting. Let's see, I know we have about 10 minutes left for general discussion. We do want to leave some time for community input, but I do want to make sure that we hear from all of you. There are some of you we haven't heard from too much. Jody, did you have something you'd like to share?
Yes, well, I have something I'd like to ask. How does this conceptual draft that you have on the screen dovetail or not dovetail with the Urban Ring One Community plan or study that's been done?
Yes,
yeah,
so that's something that we, thank you. Yeah, I can speak to that. So that's something that we definitely considered as part of the development of the framework. So the US 29 corridor, you can see that this development bubble extends out past the city. That US 29 is shown in the urban ring area as a mixed use corridor. Supporting a higher intensity use, certainly higher intensity than what's shown today. Hey, oh, thank you. Than the US 29 corridor that's shown today. So we did extend that mixed use opportunity into the city, taking into consideration that urban ring recommendation. Again, along near Fontaine, there are recommendations for more office and industrial uses on the west side of the city. So continuing that JPA corridor out towards those potential future uses is something that we considered. Same as 5th Street, the community college is located on the south side of the city. So providing opportunities for people to live close to the community college, as well as other more office and institutional uses planned on the south side of the city. And then the Pantops area on our amenities maps, we call that out as a potential major growth area or another area of more intensive development, similar to the US 29 and downtown area anchored by the hospital. So we did extend that 250 corridor. You can see here extending from River Road out to the edge of the city that leads back to downtown via High Street. So we did try to make connections where possible to where the urban ring is showing more intensive development along the city's edge.
And I would also add, you know, we, with the affordable housing plan, we sort of coordinated with the county, and our our intention with this is that we will have a discussion with the county planning, you know, group as we move forward here to say, here's what we're looking at, you know, just to get their thoughts on that. You know, it's certainly a recommendation, the affordable housing plan, to coordinate with the county as that moves forward, and that'll be our recommendation on this as well.
Excellent. I'm glad to hear that. It'd be short-sighted just to be thinking of the 10.4 acres. I mean, square miles that we have.
Definitely.
Looking again at the Preston there, Preston's got a weird history, and I hesitate to even bring it up. So it was originally supposed to be originally during urban renewal, it was supposed to be a 6-lane highway, just really getting those cars through. And the neighborhood freaked out. They said, no, we don't want to be a 6-lane highway. We want to be a neighborhood. We scrapped the plan, we killed the project, we stopped that sort of wide highway right there at Washington Park. And at the sort of like weird triangle thing that's there at 10th Street. And from then on, it wasn't a major corridor for the city. It was a neighborhood corridor, and it's been designated a neighborhood corridor in Streets That Work. It's an uncomfortable history. It's definitely a story of privilege and race, because the lower income and African American community on Preston did not get that luxury. They got knocked out. Don't know how to handle that. Don't know how to show that on the map, but highlighting it, issue.
Thank you.
Yeah, no, I think that's good to point out, Preston.
We
And
certainly won't
we
try to solve
also
it.
want to, that's right. And we also want to keep in mind that intensity can occur in different forms. So it may not be wholesale wiping out, a block to make way for a larger development. It could be infill, perhaps if there are larger lot residential uses along Preston Avenue, thinking about opportunities to infill or densify existing lots. So density can take place in different forms, and that's something that we'll want to consider along all of these corridors.
Yeah, I think that builds on that discussion we had earlier with Cherry Avenue, potentially adding that as a corridor, and there might be different sort of scales of corridors, and that might be something we consider with Preston as well. Other thoughts?
Vinny, what are the next steps? And have you thought ahead about what the final goal is? Are we going to have a land use future map that has hard boundaries to the different zones, districts within it, or a fading boundary? Where is this going?
It's a good question. Our intention is not to have a land use map that looks like this. So just to get that out of the way, this is just a framework for discussion. Obviously the version that you all use in 2017, 2018 had that more of a gradual scale of intensity. And this is, something we have talked about, whether we should show more solid lines. Ron, did you have thoughts you wanted to share about that?
Yeah, I think you're bringing up a really good point, and I started to allude to it in point 2. Thinking about how wide, for instance, the corridors, how wide, how far back do we go from these corridors, and how defined do we be? Is it parcel width along these corridors? Is it one block? Are we tiering development back? Based on a 5-minute walk, more intensive along the corridor, and then more medium and moderate intensity moving away from the corridor based on a 5-minute walk. I think that's something that we should talk about now, and whether or not we want to show something that's more definitive. Keeping in mind that this land use map will be used as a basis for the zoning map, which will be more detailed and begin to break these areas down in a more fuller context. So I think for us, it'll be interesting to hear from you all how you envision the future land map to look. The maps that we've seen from 2017 to 2018 have been more of a faded spectrum of intensity of uses. But then we know from the 2013 comp plan, we had more parcel aligned future land use recommendations, which we think that's probably the realm that we want to lean towards. But I think that's a good point of confirmation from the group as to,
I was going to turn it around and say that I was looking to you all as the professionals to make recommendations to us based upon your experience in other areas and other cities. And so I was hoping that we were going to get some sort of guidance, direction, recommendations from you all.
And
Yeah.
before they answer the question, I'm just wondering if Ron or Jenny think that a faded map, doesn't that give us more flexibility? And to my colleagues, don't we want more flexibility?
Yeah,
And I don't know the answer. I'm just asking you guys. You guys are.
and my recollection, though I obviously wasn't on the commission at the time, was that the reason we moved to the faded map in the very beginning of this process was because the rigidity of that 2013 map was kind of causing some problems. Like you'd be right across the street or right next to a different designation in the comp plan. And, you know, even though it made basically as much sense for your parcel to be like the next door parcel is, you know, just because that happened to be where they drew the line, when we come to review zoning decisions, we have to say, oh, this parcel is, you know, X designation. And the faded or the transition kind of, it reflects the fact that when we're thinking about this, you know, we really are thinking about kind of the broader, you know, what is it near, you know, what amenities can be accessed from this place. It's not such a parcel by parcel thing. And though, of course, you know, the zoning ultimately will be.
Yes.
So I think Lau is trying to make a point as well. So Lau, you need to unmute before you make your point.
I'm just thinking about this. It's a big issue. Generally, I'm really not a fan of the, you know, the parcel by parcel land use map that we had that we're still working off now from 2013. But I'm not clear on the best way away from that.
And so, and Jenny, I promise to get the meeting back to you. but for now, can I get Ron's professional opinion and then yours as well, please? And then you've got the ball back.
Yeah, I think you made a really good point on flexibility. When we show the faded kind of the gradient from the corridors, specifically the corridors, I think those areas, because they touch so many residential areas, and the neighborhoods outside the corridors are so dynamic. When we do have more of the faded technique, it allows more flexibility in the zoning planning process to define how the more intensive development along the corridor step down to the existing neighborhoods. So it does provide for that. Getting down to a more parcel-based recommendation, we can be much more specific. And even thinking about this map, if we were to say that we want soft density at some scale throughout the entirety of the city, and then this is specifically where we want more intensive uses based on those parcel boundaries, taking into account underutilized properties, property size, where more concentrated development is taking place today, we can begin to define the corridors. Maybe there's a maximum of 3 or 4 colors that we use. A yellow for existing residential, a purple for intensive, more high intensity uses along the corridors and at the nodes, and then maybe a more moderate and a lighter purple to show the gradation from the center line of those streets. So I think it's something that we're going to have to investigate moving forward. Now that we kind of have a general consensus of, you know, this is a general idea, plus the comments that we received today, that we'll go back and refine this framework, and then we will look at how the map is structured. I think that's something that we need to continue to develop in-house as to how we want to show those boundaries, whether it's faded or defined.
And so I'd like to go back to Jody, because Jody's been the leader of this effort for a number of years from the old board. Jody, you comfortable with that answer?
Yeah, I'm not the leader. I just survived. That's all. Yeah, I mean that was the lay people who were on the commission back, you know, years ago. That was our thinking, that we were concerned about with hard boundaries having one property owner on one side of the boundary say, why aren't I in it? And one on the other complaining about being in it. And when we really were just wanting to get across the general locations and not wanting to get down to going parcel by parcel. So that was our thinking, and I'm glad to hear that the professionals are thinking similarly.
Yeah.
I'd also like to, if I could, call upon our other professional, Lee Einsweiler from the zoning team. He's listening in. Lee, do you have some thoughts on this?
So I do, and I guess I perhaps would be pushing back the other direction, Jody. So if zoning is plan implementation, then make a plan and have the zoning implemented. That's not to say there should be a one-to-one, zoning district to land use map, direct translation. There should always be, 2 or 3 categories perhaps available, that are options for that area. And there might be height options even within those general categories. So there should always be a palette of things that you can do. But I think the majority of the community, especially when you're talking about the difference between pure residential areas and corridors or nodes of commercial activity, they want to know where the boundaries for those are today. Not to say that they shouldn't change, not to say that, they don't have options to be different in the future, but they'd rather have you amend the plan map and then move forward with the zoning, have the more general conversation at the plan map level. If you're going to do something radical enough, because otherwise what we typically see is very clever, typically attorneys, wielding the plan against the surrounding neighborhood's wishes, et cetera. And you really get a very problematic conversation. I would rather have a one-time problematic conversation at the time of this adoption. Now, the big difference in this process we're going through right now is we do intend to follow along with a change to the zoning map right behind this. That is a blessing and a curse, as you all know, but it is an opportunity for us to very clearly say, here's where we're starting to implement the future land use map, right? And we can continue to implement the future land use map, as we go on. A soft boundary that reaches into a single family neighborhood from a corridor, for example, is really hard for neighborhoods to understand. If you take the block face along the road, if you take the full block, if you take a block and a half and change as zoning typically would on a back lot line, all those things make some sense to people. Not drawing those kinds of boundaries in many ways seems to leave their neighborhood edges without protection. And that is worrisome. That has been our personal experience in implementing plan maps through zoning.
I think thank you, Lee, by the way. I think given that we're close to the end of the meeting, and I don't know that we want to have an extended discussion about this. I think we can take the input that you all gave, recognizing that you would maybe prefer that more fluid boundary, and then taking Lee's notes into account. I wonder if we can give some thoughts before we move forward to all of you on how we think that might work, what our proposed approach would be. It could be that there is some sort of combination of approaches that we can use here. But I think I don't want us to get too much in the weeds tonight and not have time for comments.
Well, if I could just say quickly, I appreciate what Lee is saying. What I worry though is that we're not going to be, it's going to be difficult to make significant changes in our future land use map if we're going to be stuck with hard boundaries that will be falling back to what they are now, because to do anything more aggressive is just going to create a lot of controversy and a lot of questions, and we're just going to have to go parcel by parcel. This I worry that it's going to create tremendous issues for us if we try to do something more expansive and then put hard boundaries on it. My thought.
Well, I would also say, Jody, that it's going to come down to that in the end anyway. And I think where we are anticipating, changes, growth, height variances, extended, things like that, I think we do need to say where that's going to happen. And then in some way you can just say to a property owner adjacent to this space that is changing will have options that people who are not adjacent to it will not have. Because we need to identify those places where we think we need to go up because we can't go out anymore.
Well, I think that eventually will happen. We have to, like you said, but I'm seeing the future land use plan as a step in that direction, not the final direction in itself.
And I think what we found last time is that we kind of wrestled with this idea of transition zones where we go from, the dense center and the mid rises to down to, your smaller apartment buildings, your 12 plexes, your 8 plexes, down to, the 1 plexes and 4 plexes of your most residential areas. And I think we did in the end, before it ended, realize that we do need to differentiate that transition and that kind of softer gradient from the use, the potential for mixed use and commercial use, which I think is why in one of our last meetings we ended up going back to specifically designating, mixed use or commercial use areas with those hatch marks as a category kind of separate from the intensity of the built form. Which, I mean, to me, it sounds like maybe that is the thing that residential neighborhoods, kind of worry about most, maybe.
Okay. Again, I think we can take what we're hearing from you all tonight, I think, and maybe propose what we think the best approach would be. Ron, does that make sense to you? Do you think we have enough? Okay. And we can do that before we fully flesh out the more specific future land use map, which, Jody, to answer your question from probably 20 minutes ago, is the next step. Us to sort of take what we heard from you and make this more less of a rounded edge map and something that gets a little bit more specific. But before we move on, I do want to ask Ms. Dowell if you have anything you want to say before we go to public comments. And I'm happy to, if there's a couple other comments, otherwise I think we'll want to go to public. But Ms. Dowell?
Thank you for the opportunity. I also agree with what was said. We do need to have some designation of the zoning change from more the intense density to the lower intensity, and then make sure that our key is very definitive on describing to the layperson in just a quick glance what each zone represents in the intensity of the zone. But otherwise, yes, I definitely agree with Ron in that. I also think that we need things to be delineated, and we can't say just, well, this is the delineation, and if you're across from it or adjacent to it, then we can do special circumstances. I think we need to draw our lines, figure out what we want to define as what, and then stick to that. So that way, like, I'm sorry, I'm trying to find his name on the board. He didn't have his picture up, but I think his
Lee.
Yes, Lee. We do need to have, the delineation, so therefore people know. If we are planning, then let's plan and then implement, not plan, withdraw, or go back on the plan and then say we need to come up with something else. I think, but I do feel like we're on a good path to that. Thank you.
Great, thank you. That all being said, I will suggest that we go to.
We've got one more person that would like to.
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Sorry, just a couple of principles that we were talking about in 2018 that I suddenly recall. Sort of an idea of facing like, that there shouldn't be radically different uses directly facing each other, which is actually a lot of work. And a sense of topography. Lower lying areas can handle more height. Very high areas on ridges, it makes a much bigger visual impression.
Thank you. Those are good notes to consider.
And I guess to piggyback on while we were referring to like the habitat site on I think that's Harris Street. Sorry, I forgot if it's road or street, but that site sits like way down below street level. So to have a higher building there would be appropriate versus right across the street where the Amoco or GoCo is, where it is at street level.
Mhm.
Great, thank you.
So there's one thing that would be of value to me, and maybe and this is to Latoya, Ms. Thomas. It's going to be important that we are deaf when he talks to. We handle this deftly when he talks to the equity issue. Maybe at some point there's value in your coming to the commission to talk about the equity issues and how you are planning to articulate the equity issues as relates to Charlottesville. So don't worry about doing it now, but at some point, I think we would benefit mightily from that.
No,
And the
absolutely.
community would as well.
Yeah, no, and we've started some preliminary conversations just around what the conversation publicly around land use, and particularly, bringing in the idea of equity and what that means in a land use context, what that rollout looks like. So definitely have to come back and discuss
And
that
key
further.
points, as you think about this, key points would be gentrification, what happened in Vinegar Hill, desegregation, how you manage that without haunting people with what happened with Vinegar Hill. So
yeah,
thank you. That's going to be pretty important. Okay, sorry.
That's okay. Ms. Dahl.
One last thing, and I'm sorry, I meant to add this earlier, but I didn't want to keep holding the conversation up. But I noticed, I heard you say that the community engagement process is over, which is fine. I'd just be interested to know your outcomes from that community engagement. I guess I just want to try to compare it to the information or demographics of the people who responded from the first round that we as a the first round of planning commission questions and community outreach, and how it compares to the information or demographics that you gathered this go round. And I think that's important. So that way, the next time we have this comp plan update, we're not back at the same square one. I would like to know what you did differently, how they responded differently. So that way we can know we're not reinventing the wheel moving forward, if that's possible.
Sure. Yeah. And so I would say the community engagement process is not over as a whole, but the second phase is over. So I just want to get that out very clearly, but which may have been what you meant. But so we do have summaries of community engagement from the first phase, May and June, and we have a summary from the second phase, which was November and December, into early December. So we do have documents that summarize all the activities that were completed, as well as what we heard and who we heard from when we have the demographic information. And so I would be happy to make sure you have those, and I don't have them in front of me right now. But I'd be happy to pull together a brief sort of summary on how they compare, if that works for you.
Absolutely, and I'd appreciate that. I definitely wasn't expecting you to have that one.
Sure, sure.
I think it's going to be a learning tool for everyone moving forward. If we had to hire a consultant because we couldn't hit the benchmark, I want to make sure that if the consultants hit the benchmark, what did they do to hit the benchmark? Did we really reach the demographics that we were looking for? Because that was the initial halt in the comp plan update anyway. And so that way, when we're back in this situation or with any of our community engagement moving forward, it's almost like your information will be our golden rod. So
yeah,
thank you.
so maybe the best time to talk about that would be, we can summarize that when we come to you with the next phase of engagement, when we're talking about that, to have some
That's
lessons
fine.
learned.
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you.
Sounds good.
So one last thing, and I won't go into too much detail on this because I think the information is embargoed for a while. But UVA, which is probably their footprint is probably 1/3 of their footprint is in the city, is beginning to think about affordable housing. And they're beginning to think about that beyond just what goes on with the students at UVA. Again, I can't go into lots of detail, but it's embargoed. But I would ask you to reach out to Bill and to Alex to connect you with the consultants that we brought on board at UVA to begin thinking about affordable housing so that you are able to factor the work that you guys are doing into the work that UVA is doing as well.
Great. Yeah, we're certainly aware of the more general goals that they have, but it'd be great to get some more specifics if we can. So we can.
You know, I'm not sure if Alex or Bill, if there's any more than that you can say because it's embargoed, but if you can.
Yeah, I mean, as you guys know, this was announced about a little under a year ago, about a week before all the lockdowns from COVID happened. And as a UVA initiative to support affordable housing in the region. And it kind of got put on the back burner until we got our act together. And at this point, there's been a consultant hired to start kind of, they've been referred to as like a Sherpa in a way to kind of help us through this process, help UVA understand like what would make the most sense. Having made a statement of intent to, to have this, to do this, how do we implement it? And so I know that process is just starting. But, I think it goes hand in hand with everything we're talking about. So.
Alex, anything else? Alex?
I think Mr. Palmer noted the status of UVA process. We had a LUPEC meeting last week. I think we were provided an update in terms of the hiring of the consultant by UVA. Having said that, and as we move forward, I think RHI and staff, we have to touch base with the Office of University Architect, regarding some of the project and initiatives they have on the Ivy corridor and what have you. I think there's a lot going on at UVA right now in terms of planning and redevelopment. So we have to catch up with that and make sure we are speaking the same language.
Yeah, we'll make sure we've got up-to-date information on all of that.
Yeah. And we'll, we can't talk much about it yet, but I think by the middle of March, we should be, the information will be no longer embargoed. And I think there's value in you chatting with their consultants. I suspect that some of you guys know who they are and will enjoy working with them.
I think we had, we already had some kind of consultations with UVA and our consultants, and also the foundation, UVA Foundation, regarding development and housing. So we continue that discussion, as we move forward.
Yep.
Okay. So Ms. Jenny, are you ready to go to public hearings, or do you have more things that you want to?
No, I think, thank you all for this discussion tonight. I would suggest we go to public comment. We've committed to that, and I want to open up for that. And I will note, given that we're past time, I think we will take note of the questions and comments, and we can respond after the meeting. We can make that available, we can, send out some notes about that. But I
And
think
we-
unless it's a quick response, we probably won't respond.
No, we
tonight.
typically just take the comments and we
Yeah.
respond later. So,
Great.
Mr. Rice, is there anyone in the lobby that would like to speak to the consultants?
Thank you, Chair Mitchell. If you would like to address commission during public comment, please click the raise hand icon or *9 if you're joining us by phone, and you'll be called upon in order of hands raised. When called upon, please unmute your mic. You'll have 3 minutes for comment. And our first speaker is Bill Emery. Bill, you're on with commission.
Bill, welcome. Good to hear from you again.
Good evening, everyone. Of course, I'm a huge fan of planning, and I hope that you guys can give the members of the public some tips on how this plan will be modified as we go along, because like in the Willow Mills, we first asked for a small area plan in 1988, still haven't gotten it. And it's very, disturbing to see the node in the middle of the graveyard. We're ready to talk. We have a lot of information. We have 50 years of institutional memory, and of course, Vienna Roadside and all the Jenny and all the planners are our favorite people. So we look forward to working with them. But it's just really unnerving so far. So anyway, that's all I have right now. Thank you.
Bill, thank you. And again, I'll thank Ms. Russell for making note of the fact that we need to move that node over a bit.
Can I also just add too that this will also, I know we don't need to have this discussion now, but a thing we will need to explore is how the affordable, any of these plans, how the future land use map interacts with both our historic districts. And in the case of Woollen Mills, that's under a conservation district, which is different and interesting, and perhaps something we could explore when we're talking about the ways that a neighborhood could both be protected and, change. So I'll just leave it at that.
Thank you. Mr. Price, before we move on, when you get a moment, would you start the clock? Folks have 3 minutes. And after that, who's next?
Sure. Next up, we have Kimber Hockey. Kimber, you're on with the commission. You have 3 minutes.
Hey, Kimber.
Hello. Thank you. Thank you very much for hearing me. I was really glad to hear Lee talk about the impact on neighborhoods, because it often seems like a lot of these decisions are being made from the outside and being imposed on neighborhoods. I'm speaking from my household, by the way. I live in the Belmont neighborhood with my husband. It just doesn't, we're questioning amount of extensive community engagement that has been done. I know that we filled out a survey online, but we didn't see anything about mentioning historic preservation, tree preservation, and green space preservation in the materials. And I know other people are concerned about that, so I would just concerned not to see those issues being raised as well. It would be helpful for the community to see the information, what percentage of the population actually gave input here, and how does that break down per neighborhood as well. As far as, I look at the map, I see the designation of quote unquote downtown Belmont. That's something that was imposed on this neighborhood probably starting maybe 18 years ago, and I can't really remember when. But when we moved into Belmont, there was no quote unquote downtown Belmont. And it really comes off as the city looking to co-opt our historic residential neighborhood as an extension of the downtown mall, which it is not. It is a neighborhood in and of itself and always has been. And I would suggest maybe something like Belmont Center instead, because we are not downtown. Listening to Belmont Center being designated as a major node is concerning. How do the residents who have lived in Belmont for generations feel about that? We have not seen the getting a gallon of milk thing happen here in Belmont. We've seen a lot of restaurants that have negatively impacted us with the destruction of trees, noise, the smell, stopped up pipes, and issues of parking. And again, maybe 1 or 2 small restaurants would have done this area well, but there's just been a lot of push for that restaurant type of business that brings in people from outside the neighborhood. We're also concerned about, we've never seen a small area plan for Belmont, as Mr. Emery pointed out. Where is that? And if it doesn't exist, why hasn't that been done? And how do we involve the neighborhood in that? We were concerned to see the purple as high intensity areas. It seems to be that floodplain is still in that purple area. So we have questions about that. And I think that's probably about all. Thank you very much. And we would really love to see the emails of the Planning Commission back on the website so that people can send emails and have more of a real conversation with the planners. Thank you.
Thank you, Kimber. Mr. Rice.
And next we have Crystal Passmore. Crystal, you're on with commission. You have 3 minutes.
Crystal, welcome.
Hi, I tricked you. I'm not Crystal. I'm just borrowing her laptop. I hope it's okay. This is her.
So who are you?
So I am Josh Karp. I am married to Crystal. I live in Rose Hill, renting over here. I have one quick comment and one less quick comment. Quick one. So I've been reading and thinking a lot about displacement and zoning and gentrification. And I think I want to commend you all for talking about it and taking it seriously. What I believe so far is that the best way to prevent displacement is to have policies that explicitly prevent it. If evictions are a problem, we should make evictions hard to perform. I don't think that not allowing people to build smaller homes on less land will prevent displacement. I think I would love to hear more about your plans for tenants' rights because we don't do well with them and we should do better. Sorry, comment 2. I was looking at the intensity map and I think there's some good stuff there, but I was struck by, and I think other people mentioned this during the call, some of the areas that are marked for high intensity are frankly kind of crummy for reasons that are not likely to change anytime soon. So if you walk around Harris Street, you will pass, I think it's a concrete manufacturing plant. You will pass a gas station, landscaping store. Landscaping is fine. I don't so much want to live with my small child next to a concrete facility with heavy loading trucks driving in and out all the time. Wouldn't want to walk there. There aren't, I don't think, continuous sidewalks there. I wouldn't want to bike there. Similarly, high intensity on Barracks, I think makes sense. Barracks is a busy, loud, highly trafficked road with lots of cars on it. Again, I would not want to cross it with a child or on a bike, or frankly, be around there on foot in any way. So I think absolutely allow housing there, but I would not want to put all of the smaller, cheaper housing in parts of town where frankly people don't want to live. I think when you're looking to build to a lot more density, the best places to put it are the places that are desirable. That is going to include lots of downtown, I think more than you have on the map right now, more of Belmont. And to me, I'm a parent of a young child, think about this a lot, near schools. I really, really want to be able to walk my kid to school without getting in a car or crossing a major road or spending $500,000 on a house. And right now that is not really possible in town. So I would just think broadly about allowing people to live where people want to live and not in industrial car-focused parts of town. So don't take anything out intensity-wise, but you might want to add more homes, more intensity close to places where people actually choose to live. Thanks very much for the time.
Well, thank you. That was helpful. Appreciate that. Mr. Rice.
And next we have Neil Williamson. Neil, you're on with commission. You have 3 minutes.
Neil, welcome. Thank you for joining us.
Greetings, Neil Williamson with the Free Enterprise Forum. I believe I've spent at least 50 months on this project and with all of you, and I appreciate tonight's conversation. Number one, change is hard. Number two, change is needed. I'm a little concerned by some of the comments regarding the zoning may kind of modify what the comp plan says. I think we need to make big changes and think big. We are very concerned with tonight's quote, non-specific nature. I know we've got to start somewhere. I know that's the case. We're just really looking forward to more specificity in the future. The the community needs objective metrics regarding the impact of these changes. I know that's hard at the comp plan level, but the community needs to understand what you're proposing. Specifically, how or what objective metrics it would be impacting the dovetailed affordable housing plan. You've got an affordable needs assessment. How does this fit with that? Will there be enough units? Could it work? These are knowable answers, and I hope that we can get to them. Finally, I really hope that this will result in the mantra, more housing everywhere for everyone. Thank you for the opportunity to speak.
Thank you, sir. I do appreciate that. Thank you. Mr. Rice.
Next, we have Lise Stossel. Lise, you are on with commission. You have 3 minutes.
Lise, are you muted?
I just unmuted myself.
We can hear you now. Yay.
Okay. Thank you for this meeting and all of the information that you shared. What I have is actually a series of questions. I wasn't sure what the sort of protocol would be for community input. So
Let me, if I can interrupt you, just we will note your questions. We won't answer them tonight, but we'll note the questions, and someone from staff, forgive me, Alex and Missy, will attempt to engage you. So please list your questions, and we'll try to get back to you.
Right, that's what I was going to suggest. And can I expect maybe an email back from somebody in response to the questions, or how?
I think yeah, an email would be the most reasonable way to do that, unless clarification is needed, and they'll give you a buzz.
Okay. All right. So I'm just going to fire away. The first question is, what changes are you envisioning for the River Road corridor? I was part of a webinar, Zoom call specifically about the river corridor, and I guess my specific question about that is there a possibility to move the industrial features, the industrial uses, away from the river and develop it as the natural and recreational resource that it is? Yeah, I see that there's apartment buildings going up there now. I think that it would be great to change that whole area into mixed use, residential, affordable housing, you know, a nice place to live, public school nearby, beautiful area. And why do we have to have, you know, these heavy industrial businesses there that could easily do their work and their business elsewhere in the city? We have a responsibility to really celebrate the fact that we've got this beautiful river, and not have it hiding behind these industrial businesses. So I don't know how much capability you all have in changing that, but that's just my input. A next question is, what changes would you envision for the Woolen Mills node? I know that there's this new refurbishment of the Woolen Mills, but I don't really know what you have in mind in terms of anything beyond that. And then would it be possible to move the large metal recycling industry out of Woolen Mills to the Avon Street Extended Industrial Area? Does it need to be adjacent to the railroad tracks? That part of Woolen Mills could be much better utilized as residential or mixed use. That could be a great place for the Woolen Mills node, actually. And then just one minor point, when you, on your map, you've got something designated as the Locust Road nose. I think you mean Locust Avenue.
Thank you.
That's it.
Appreciate it. So at least I'll ask Joe, Mr. Rice, and Ms. Creasy, do we have your email address in the link?
I registered with my email address.
So Ms. Creasy, Mr. Rice, is that good enough to allow us to get back to?
Yes, Chair, we can get her email address and get that to you.
And Ms. Creasy, Mr. Rice, are we comfortable using email as the medium to get back to her?
That's fine with me.
Ms. Creasy?
That works fine.
Okay, thank you. Mr.
Next
Rice.
up, we have Kurt Kiesecker. Kurt, you're on with commission. You have 3 minutes.
Hey, Kurt, you can come back anytime you like. We need you.
Oh no, I'm happy to watch and listen, and thanks for letting me speak. And well done and great job. I miss you guys. I was just going to add a couple quick comments, or maybe in the form of questions. But I think you know, the thrill of the process is taking big ideas and translating them into some kind of action that can kind of carry forward. And so that mix of big concepts, which everybody, when we talk to each other, we seem to all be on the generally the same page with the big concepts. And then we move into the details of how to take action or implement. It gets harder. So I'm jealous because that's the fun part and challenging. But I think one of the tools that you can continue to use if you want, there's something between that land use plan and the zoning map, and it's those big idea diagrams. And so as you guys continue to have these meetings and speak with the public, don't forget to use the framework plan and the concept diagram to help instill, I think, some similar thinking, because we all agree, I think, generally on the big ideas. It's just, you know, when we're, so which brings me to my next point, which Jody kind of touched on with the faded edges to the lines versus the hard edges in the land use map. And I think what we were finding back in the day was that the hard-edged property line land use map, the hard edges were debated too. They weren't solid. They were just as faded. We had so many processes that allowed those land use edges to move around. I think we were thinking we would facilitate more clear conversations about something intent-wise with less concentration on the property lines and more on the ideas. And what is evident, I think, is that sometimes the property lines were arbitrary, that they didn't conform to topography, which goes to what Lyle was speaking of, and they didn't conform necessarily to cultural, historic, or other boundaries that we're all aware of as, you know, residents of Charlottesville. And so some of those soft edges, while they would push debate later in the process for proposals from applicants in the future, I think the softer edges in terms of the planning with these big ideas would allow more flexibility to be kind of responsive to the boots on the ground, what we know is there when we're walking around and not just kind of dictated by the depth or the size of certain parcels. So anyway, have fun. I'm going to tune in again, and I'll look forward to. I miss seeing everybody on the street and talking on the downtown mall about these things. These are good conversations to have over sandwiches too. But thank you for letting me attend, and I'll keep on watching. You're all doing great. Have fun. See ya.
Kurt, thank you. We frankly would do better without you, with you. So if you want to come back, come on back. And so Jenny, I would encourage you to keep Jen and Kurt involved in your deliberations. They and Tania and Jody have also put lots of effort into making this thing work. So please make sure that we don't lose their institutional knowledge. Because I just want to get this done. I don't want to start again, all over again. Sorry. Mr. Rice, who's out there?
Next, we have E. Dreyfus, and you are now on with commission.
Emily, welcome. Good to see you.
Actually, looks like she had just disconnected when I clicked her name, and now we have Caroline. Caroline, you're on with commission. You have 3 minutes.
Good evening.
Good evening.
Thank you for this informative session. I just have a quick question. I was having difficulty identifying the location of the nodes. It didn't seem like a lot of the streets were identified. Is this because the map is preliminary, or was I missing an opportunity to zoom in to identify the smaller streets?
It's probably a little bit of both. I'm not sure that the streets were all marked exactly where the nodes were, but that's something we, moving forward, will make sure it's more clear exactly the location of those.
Okay, well, thanks very much. That was it.
Okay, it looks like we have Emily back, and Emily, you are now on with commission.
Hey, Emily, thank you for agreeing to chat with us. Good to see you.
Well, thank you. Appreciate the opportunity, and sorry about my technical mishap there, Mr. Rice. Thanks for your help getting me back on. I wanted to just raise a couple of things, and so many of the comments have brought up some really important issues. If I recall correctly, COVID really stood in the way of the community involvement work that was originally planned for the consultants. And I think the response rate for Black people was only 16%. And I think most of those folks were related to some focus groups that were organized around Black home ownership, which is certainly an important issue, but only one of a few. And I want to just draw attention to the fact that we have a really limited number of city neighborhoods that continue to have a high percentage of Black people living there. And we need to preserve our cultural diversity. We need to really slow down and stop, if at all possible, the displacement happening for Black families. And so I think that the zoning was referenced a couple of different ways in the affordable housing plan. And I know that's not what we're here to talk about tonight, but one of the ways said that the planning process that you all are engaging in with zoning needs to consider which neighborhoods will be most important for upzoning, and where do you want to build the sort of duplex up to quad or small apartment buildings. And I would just like to comment that the coalition, Charlottesville Low Income Housing Coalition, really hopes that you will not do that within the predominantly Black neighborhoods that still exist. So areas like 10th and Page and parts of Fifeville and Prospect and Rose Hill and other neighborhoods need to be protected from increased density. And so I hope that you will take that into account. Thank you.
Thank you, Emily. Very helpful.
And next we have Mark Rinaldi. Mark, you're on with commission. You have 3 minutes. Mark, you are now muted. If you would unmute. Mark, you're still muted. If you could unmute your mic, please.
Well, maybe we can come back to Mark, because he's still muted.
I'll go ahead and leave him on the line, Chair, in case he can unmute his mic, and we'll see how that goes.
Okay. So do we want to move on to the next speaker since he's having trouble?
I'm
there
here.
he is. Hey, Mark.
I'm very sorry. I actually did not intend to comment. I inadvertently raised my hand, so forgive me for that. I'll save my comments for another time, but it's been a very interesting conversation. Thank you for having it publicly.
Well, thanks, Mark.
And if anybody else would like to address the commission at this time, please click the raise hand icon, or if you're joining us by phone, press *9. And there are no more raised hands, Chair.
Okay, so then I think we can wrap it up with comments from the commission, giving our consultants guidance. So I'm just going to go from left to right as we do. And I'll start with Bill. Bill, any thoughts?
I don't think I have too much to add other than what we've already talked about. I did throw a link in the chat to a news item about the affordable housing plan. So some of that, like in terms of who the consultant is on that is in there. So that's public. knowledge. Yeah, I would just encourage you, if you have questions about any of that or the university's planning, or how we want to portray some of the university aspects in this land use section, just please reach out to me, and I can either help you with that or get Office of the Architect, other personnel there involved as needed. So thanks.
Thanks, Bill.
Ms. Russell. Ms. Russell. Ms. Russell.
I don't think I have any more questions, and I think what we've done here is set a good framework for our next dive, and we can start to take a deeper dive. What do we mean by soft density? Where does it go? Really drilling into the details. So just thank the consultants, everyone else for their comments.
Rosenberg.
Yeah, I don't have too much. I think one thing I'd add is, one of those goals in the affordable housing plan was to create multifamily by right beyond soft density in those historically exclusionary, segregated white and high amenity areas. And I really don't see that quite yet in this framework. So I'll be interested to see how that's reflected in the future.
Reverend Heaton.
Yeah, I would concur with what Rory said. If you want to call it an equity zone, or how are we going to introduce the emphasis on affordability and equity in the city, if there's no way to put that in the zoning? And I don't know that I have an answer to that, but I do think the plan should reflect some aspect of the city's movement towards affordability and equity. So that's the only thing I would add. I think everything else tonight was really good. I like the UVA different color, and I like the idea that we're going to have to move toward a lot designation. The soft edges don't work in the end. So that I thought was all good.
Ms. Dow.
For the most part, I've already stated the few little questions or issues that I've had. I think we are moving definitely in the right direction. I just want to make sure that the demographics that we were looking for to respond to this plan have been captured. I do know COVID has played a big factor in this, but that was to me the whole purpose of having this second go around. The other thing that I did want to just reiterate is that I also noticed we had talked about originally, I think, and this is what Rory was mentioning, out like in the Greenbrier neighborhood, it doesn't look like much has been changed as far as the intensity goes. And so that's where that equity and inclusion is going to have to be reflected in the map. But I say you're doing a good job, and I appreciate the hard work. And I look forward to the next time we meet with an update.
Mrs. Oyetz.
I think the public comment really nailed it. I emailed a little bit earlier. Adequacy, equity, and access to schools and parks. If we can really hit that, I think we've got it. What I see, I think, makes sense, but I think we can do more.
And Mr. Landra. We gonna need you to unmute, dude.
I'm working on it. Wait a second. So at this first broad brush concept level, looking at the first draft plan by the consultants and looking at the guidelines or the concepts that are listed, increased dense mixed use at key nodes, a hub and spokes framework, transition from more dense development to softer density, maximize access to transit. These are all things that we were working on 3 years ago. So it's heartening to see that that we're following in this same kind of direction. And But as I know, and as you all know, the devil's in the details from here on out. So good luck.
And so
we'll be there with you.
So the idea of increasing density with equity in mind is important. I was not artful earlier, and I probably will not be even more artful now when I worry about the fact that we've got desegregation in the guideline. It's important, but we have to keep in mind the culture here. And what happened with Vinegar Hill when they desegregated for the sake of doing all kinds of wonderful things for the city. So let's just keep that in mind as we present this to the public. We do want to increase density, because increasing density brings more equity housing, but we just need to make sure that we market this correctly. The other thing is infill development. It's going to be challenging because infill development will be expensive, because we have to do all the work that we need to do to mitigate the negative impacts to our environment, our streams, our creeks, our waterways, when we build on these properties. And I would have no idea what the number is, but I'm sure our engineers do. How many of those properties that are like vacant are on critical slopes that feed into our creeks and streams? We need to protect those. So something we need to think about when we begin crafting the comprehensive plan, and we begin thinking about how we increase the affordable housing stock, and how we increase our density and then protect the critical slopes.
We can keep that in mind for the next iteration of the plan.
So Jenny, it's your ball. My question to you and your team would be, did you get what you needed, or is there more you need?
Not tonight. I would say I think we've got a lot of good feedback. I'll have to go back and read through my notes again, because we've been taking sort of feverish notes here. But I think we've got a lot to work with, both in terms of how we can refine the plan at this stage, and then come back and have a check-in point with you before we have a larger public engagement phase, which will involve a variety of activities as our other engagement phases have. So when we come back, we'll try to address the issues we've talked about tonight and progress it along. Ron, did you have specific thoughts you wanted to share and wrap up?
Yeah, I agree with you, Jenny, that we received a lot of good feedback tonight that will give us a good path forward to refine the concept that you all seen today and to the next iteration.
So the only question I then ask, and I hate to put staff on the spot, but their opinions are the opinions I value most. Ms. Creasy, Ms. Rainey, Ms. Alfie, Mr. Akafuna, you guys, do you have what you need?
Yeah, we're good. Yeah, we're good.
I think we have a lot of good information, and we'll be able to take that and make it work for the next conversation.
Okay.
Which I will coordinate with Missy to schedule this week, if we can.
And so, Lloyd, I'm not sure I'm allowed to ask you guys if you have input, but I'm going to do it because I will. Any thoughts, Lloyd and Michael?
I'm going to think about it a little bit, and I will end up, I'm sure, emailing a couple of questions to Jenny and others. But since I'm just sort of getting introduced to the topic, I'm trying not to embarrass myself in public too early.
Sounds good.
You're braver than me, but Michael, you cool? I think Michael's cool. Hey, Jenny, thank you. Thank you for the team.
Thank you all.
In your note taking, did you get Lloyd's quote that had something to do with leadership and longevity or survival? I really want to take that home too. Whatever it was Lloyd said, or Jody said.
I just said, try not to embarrass yourself in public too early.
No, that was good too. But earlier in the meeting, Jody said something about leadership and longevity or survival or something. It was great.
I didn't catch that one myself, but I'm sure we can
Okay.
pull it from the video.
Jody,
I'll
what
get-
was it?
It was survival. I just,
Survival.
yeah, I'm still alive.
Hey, Jenny, just want to say that thank you. This is great. I'm tickled with the ads of Matt and Ron. They were very helpful. Thank you. Thank you for bringing them back on board.
Yeah, thank you.
They'll be
It's
back.
fun.
Thank you all. Have a good night.
Bye.
Nice.